Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. I figured we might as well switch it up and let me start it off a different way today. But hi, everybody! Today we're going to be talking with Torry Colvin, who is both a screenplay writer and a director extraordinaire. So let's spend some time with him. You'll notice there's no book covers today because there's no book covers to show. We're just going to have to let Torry speak for himself. Let's go for it.
All right. So 3, 2, 1.
Well, hello there, Nicole.
Very eyes wide shut, baby.
Definitely. Great movie reference.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I just know that it's a reference to like a sexual masquerade party. That's the end of my knowledge.
That's it. It's an interesting film. It's definitely worth seeing once.
All
Definitely
right.
an interesting
Is it
film.
something I see with my husband for later activities or something I see by myself and then like feel ashamed that I watched it?
Now you can watch it with your husband. It's definitely interesting.
All right. Okay. Sounds good. So I will go ahead and I'm going to get out of this because as much as Venetian as I look, let's talk like regular people, okay?
Now sounds good.
Okay. So we're here today with Torry Colvin, and if you're those of you who don't know him, he is a screenwriter, and he also writes a lot of different prose work, and he does writing for regular companies. We'll call them regular companies because I don't know what else to call them. But I've read a good portion of Torry's work. I read 2 of his screenplays. I've read a lot of his prose work in a writing group we're in together, and we're excited to talk together today. So hi, Torry.
Oh, nice to be here. Thanks for inviting
Nice,
me.
nice to have you here. So I wanted to talk to you. We've had a screenwriter on the show before, but he also did editing as a side business. So we really talked a lot about his editing. But I'd love to dive into screenplay writing. So what is it about that medium that speaks to you?
I think part of it is that you get to craft the world. It can be as different as you want it to be, and you have to be really succinct with your words. So you don't have the ability to write prose. You don't have the ability to, write, 300 pages. It's, 90 to 100 pages, and your descriptions have to be quick and easy, but memorable for a reader. So you've got to be able to paint a world that someone can envision, but do it in a short amount of time. And I think that speaks to me.
So how did you get into writing screenplays? Like what was the beginning moment, the birth of screenplay writing for you?
You know, I majored in economics and communication in college, and I took a class on filmmaking and really enjoyed it as part of my communications electives. And from there, I started writing, and it wasn't something that, okay, one day I'm going to write a screenplay. I'm going to try to film it. It was really just therapeutic for me, cathartic. Something that I enjoyed doing. So I did it on the regular. I watch quite a few movies, and like most people, and while watching the movies, I would dissect them and I would look at them, and occasionally I'd be able to get online and find a screenplay. And at some point in time, I thought of a story I wanted to tell, so I told it.
Now, I know that when people so for example, like people read plays, and they have a playbook and it has the stage instructions and things like that. Is there a resource like that for screenplays? Are you ever like, I'm gonna pick up a screenplay by this guy and I'm gonna find it in the library? Like,
Not necessarily at the library, but there are so many places online. There's repositories of screenplays that you can go read. Now, usually they only have the top screenplays. So, or the top TV shows, the pilot of the top TV shows. So, you're not likely going to be able to go find, season 7, episode 4 of Grey's Anatomy or something like that. But, you'll be able to find the pilot and, all the Oscar winners and popular films. Those screenplays are typically available online. And so, one of my favorites is Shawshank Redemption. So, That's one of the ones that I've read and dissected and watched over and over again to see how it translated from the medium on paper to film.
Now that's something that really takes a lot of trust, because you've worked with people to actually make your screenplays come to life before. And it seems like there's a lot of trust involved in saying, like, you're gonna get it and make it.
So for me, I don't just write. So I've directed both my own work as well as the work of others. So for the work that I do, all the work that I've done, I've directed it myself. So the trust is sort of unilateral. So I trust myself to tell my story the way that I want to tell my story. I have worked on writings done by others as well, though, from a director standpoint. And yes, there's a huge amount of trust in order to be able to take someone else's story and effectively put it on screen.
So is there any time where you had something that you envisioned on paper, but then when you went to make it happen in real life, you realized that it wasn't working for whatever reason, or has it always worked?
No, I don't know that it's always worked to the way that you envision when you do it. You know, Filmmaking is such a collaborative process, right? So you envision this world, but it's even if you're the writer, director, producer, there's so many things that are out of your control as far as how it's delivered in its final format, in the actual finished film. And so part of it is you have to cast right? So you have to get the perfect actors or the right actors that are able to convey the meaning of what you've written on film. The world that you create, sometimes, I do quite a few things that are lower budget, that don't have a significant amount of money to put into the project. And so if I've created a world that calls for things that I don't have the budget to do, then there has to be an adaptation of it. So you have to adapt what you've written in order to make it work with the budget that you have for a project. And I think no matter what film you do, you run into that issue. You hear of blockbusters that cost $200 million to make, and they're $50 million over budget because they weren't able to create the world that they thought they needed. And that's unfortunately part of the business.
When you take it back to writing, then, do you ever feel constrained, saying, like, if I want this to come to fruition, I have to keep it in this bubble of
So
possibility?
if it depends on if I'm writing it for me, to do as a project versus I'm writing it just for the sake of doing it. So I've written several things that there were stories that came to me that I really enjoyed, but I knew I didn't have the money and I didn't have the financing in order to do it, but I've still written them. I've written blockbuster action films that take place across four different continents, and have tons of CGI and FX work that would be necessary in order to make them work. With the knowledge that it may be something someone else has to direct, it may be something that never gets made, but at the end of the day, it's something I definitely know that I'm not going to be able to do. And so I don't feel constrained if I feel there's a story to be told. I just tell the story. And like most writers, I have tons of stuff that's sitting on a shelf that, nothing's been done with. And, maybe one day it will, maybe it won't, but it's there. So I try not to constrain myself with what I'm writing.
Just about the joy of it.
Yeah, it's about the joy. You gotta have fun. You've got to write what you want to write, and some days it's different. One day it might be an action, another day it might be a period piece, another day it might be a romantic drama, romantic comedy. Although I don't do, I shy away from comedy to some extent. I think there's little jokes in everything I do, but it's not, there's no comedic writing that I've really focused on.
It's funny that you say that, because I do self-published work, and I'm sorry I keep wiping my nose. I swear to God I'm not on cocaine. I swear to God. But it's interesting that you say that, because in the self-published world, I've been doing the same thing. I'm writing whatever story grabs me, and I can't say it's always fun.
Yeah,
Sometimes I get to that scene, I'm like, "Dang, that's this scene!"
right.
But I'm going where the muse takes me. And what I hear all the way around is that I'm doing myself a disservice, that people will come to an author and expect genre, expect trope, expect something. Is it the same in screenwriting that you get known to be like, well, Torry writes blockbusters versus Torry writes rom-coms?
I think it probably is, especially if you're writing for other people. If you write a romantic comedy and it's a big hit, then everyone's coming to you to write another romantic comedy, is my guess. If you write an action film and Spielberg directs it, then everyone wants to see the next action film. I think as an independent, you sort of have the ability to cross genres and do what you want if you're not concerned about being pigeonholed and you're not concerned about selling the next script. And that's sort of where I am as an independent is I'm not concerned about selling my script to someone else. I'm not concerned about whether or not someone else is going to make it. So if I want to go from drama to dramedy to action, then I can do it and not have to worry about the repercussions. But I think generally, as an author, people do tend to write the same thing. Grisham writes the same story over and over again, and he just tells it in a different way. Um, and I think that's part of what people have come to expect. But for me, stepping out of your comfort zone and doing things that you want to do is frequently more rewarding than just writing the same piece over and over again.
Yeah, it's true that you said that. Like there is a pattern certain people have, and then sometimes there's authors that once I've noticed that once they establish themselves, then they start feeling more free to break off and do different things. Like I just read a book by Stephen King called Fairy Tale. It is not like a Stephen King book. It doesn't read like a Stephen King book, but it had Stephen King's name, so I bought it and I trusted that I'd go on a good ride. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny, even with Stephen King, as big as he is and as big as he was for a while, he was using the nom de plume. He was using his alias to write because he didn't want to put things out as Stephen King because he was concerned about how people would review the material. The expectation is that if it's a Stephen King novel, then it's going to be this. And so even as big as he was, even he felt the need to put something out as ghostwritten essentially. And that's something I think no matter how big you get, it becomes difficult. And he's not the only author. I mean, there's several major mainstream authors who've put things out and not used their own name or their original writing name.
When you are directing your own work and you're looking at scenes that you said that you might have to adapt, is it something where you're able to kind of adapt on the fly, or is it going back to the writing board?
It depends. Usually by the time that we're directing and I'm directing it, and the film is in production, then I've already adapted because I already know what the location is going to be, who the actors are going to be, and the feel that I'm going to be able to evoke from what's written. Now there have been times, as a low budget filmmaker, that locations fall out at the last minute, and because I have a crew, I have actors, I have everything set for that day, then I find an alternate location and it may not work. Usually we do a prep day where we go look at the locations. We see where the light is coming from. We see where the outlets are, so we know where we can plug in lights and how we can make it look real without, looking looking like it's a movie film, a movie setup. And so in doing those things, we sort of anticipate. Now, when you get thrown into, okay, we need a backup location, what's available, then you don't really have that prep, and so you have to take it as it comes. And so yes, at times you do end up at the last minute looking and saying, okay, how do I adapt this scene in order to make this work? Like it could be something as simple as, the scene called for them to be playing pool and at a bar, and now we don't have a pool table at a bar. Now we just have a bar. And so what's the activity or action that's going to drive the scene forward and get them moving about in the scene in the way that it was initially envisioned? And then it's as simple as, okay, let's do a quick rewrite. Instead of them playing pool, is there a dartboard? No, there's not a dartboard. Okay, well, what makes them want to get up and speak, and what makes them want to get up and walk around the restaurant or the bar in order to make the scene have that type of feel that I'm looking for? And you come up with it on the fly.
It's interesting. So when you are writing, do you ever, and this is me with my ignorance when it comes to screenplay writing, do you ever kind of create alternate versions? Like, I plan them playing pool, but if pool is not available, try darts.
No, I typically attempt to, again, it depends on if I'm writing for myself or I'm writing for others, or with the thought that maybe someone else will develop it and produce it. If I'm writing for someone else developing and producing, I don't worry about the location. I don't worry about the locale at all, because uh, that's going to be left up to someone else, right? That's not something that's going, the onus isn't going to fall on me in order to figure it out. If I'm writing for myself, then I tend to write locations which I know I have access to, or locations which I know I can get. And so, I'm not going to write, NASA space station and stuff that I'm going to do for myself, because it's not a location that is going to be cheap for me to be able to replicate. But if I'm writing for myself, I know I can get an office. I know I can get a bar. I know I can get a restaurant. I know I can get a convenience store, a gas station, little everyday things that people are like, oh, that looks familiar. That's a real location. It's not a nondescript wall like behind me with like a plain wall and just a bookshelf. It's actually real. And that, that action, I write it in the screenplay, and I try to be, as detailed as I'm allowed, given, the lack of space on the page for me to write like what the location really looks like. But those are things that I do on my own. So like looking at the behind you, you've got you've got a lot going on, and I love it from a filmmaking standpoint because it draws the eye and it gives a depth of field that you're able to see, and that's important. So I don't necessarily write in when I'm doing the screenwriting. I wouldn't write, there's pictures, there's tons of pictures on the wall, and there's this, and with specificity, but I'll put, a well apportioned or decorated room, and that will give me the idea of what it should be.
An eclectic mess of skeletons and Star Wars memorabilia pepper the walls.
I didn't want to say that, but no, a Star Wars artifacts.
An ultimate nerd owns this room. Now figure that out.
There you go.
So that brings up something else. I don't know what is wrong with my nose. The conciseness of it. That's really interesting. That like taking something visual and really paring it down. Like you must have, you learned how to do that, because that's not an innate sort of thing in you. How do you restrain yourself in that way?
It's hard at times. For me, I think I've gotten much better with it the further along I've gotten. Like I look at some of my earlier, tomes as they were, they were massive. The scripts, like, scripts were way over. I think my first screenplay that I ever wrote, it was over 130 pages, and there was so much description in there, and it's unnecessary for a film. It's unnecessary for a screenplay, for screenplay writing. And I didn't understand the basics. And even having taken a class, even having read several books, it's like when you're writing it, you think, okay, this is necessary. Like I need this. Like this tells the story, and this helps move me forward. In reality, it didn't. And so, that 130-page tome has been whittled down now, to about 92 pages. And it's like, oh, wow, how did you cut out 50 pages? Well, 50 pages were really unnecessary, and it didn't help the story move, and it didn't get me to where I needed to be. And so, like any type of writing, writing is rewriting. Like the rewriting and the editing is what really fuels, the process.
Yeah, I definitely I feel you there. I'm working on a book right now, and I'm drafting it out, and I go back and I edit as I write. I can't write the whole thing and then go back and reflesh it out. My brain just doesn't work that way. But because I'm constantly relooking at it, and rereading it from the beginning all the time, like I realized for me, it's the opposite. It's I need an additional scene here. Like this is happening too quickly. Like
Right.
for it to have emotional payoff, I need to make sure that there's an additional connection or an additional conversation or something. So it's just interesting to think about it in the reverse. And I know that you and I have done exercises together where we're trying to write, a full story, beginning, middle, and end in 500 words.
500
And like
words.
we've done a couple in 1,000 words. In 1,000, I'm like, I can do this. 500, I'm like, yeah. Can I get away with 512? Like,
Right.
please give me 512. But you're so good at it. You tell such beautiful stories in such like it's a full Word document page. It's like this is a full Word document page, and you've done it.
Thank you. You do it as well, but I think part of it is um, I have to be concise in screenwriting, so I don't have a choice, and so I'm not beholden to the words that I've written. If they don't make sense, and when we've done those exercises, 500 words, like I've gone over, like I'm sitting here looking at the Word document saying I'm at 430. Okay, I probably need another 100 words. I'm gonna go over, and then I go through and I look, and I'm looking like what can I cut out, what's not important, what doesn't move the story forward. And from a film standpoint, it's always what doesn't move the story forward, for me. What can I take out? And it's funny, when we're writing prose, we like to be able to paint a vivid story. And part of that vivid story is the beginning, middle, and end includes like people walking into a room and then people exiting. If you ever watch a film or you ever read a screenplay, very rarely do you see the individual walking into the room or leaving the room unless it's necessary to propel the story forward. So if they snuck into the room, yes, you see them walking in. But very rarely do you see otherwise unless the person answers the door to bring them in. You don't see it. And the reason is because it's not necessary. Like film is a visual medium, and we make the assumption that if they're in the room, they walked in, and then if they're not there, they left the room. And so all the extra isn't necessary because if you're watching it, you're going to be bored. Like, okay, we just spent 7 seconds having someone open a door, come through the door, and then sit down. When we could have started with them just like stepping out of frame and walking in, or hearing the doorbell ring and then cut to the walking in, because film is different. Film is like essentially it's a set of inflected shots. So it's a set of shots that are put together but aren't necessarily continuous, right? So there doesn't have to be the continuity that you have in a novel. It doesn't have to progress naturally and organically. It can be um, someone is sitting in a room and they look at a clock and then boom, the clock fast forwards and they've got food in front of them and they're leaning down and it shows that time has moved and time has passed. So we don't need to show all of the stuff that they did in order to convey that time has passed. Whereas with a novel, if you do that, then you've got a very short novel. And if someone's reading, it's like, okay, so boom, that clock fast forwarded and now we're at a different time. Like what happened? Like that's what you're expecting when you read. You don't have that same expectation when you're watching film, which makes it different.
Yeah, it's I can only imagine that you have to build up a muscle to be able to read through a screenplay. That if you are used to reading novels, reading through a screenplay has got to be disorienting or
It's different, I think. And there are people who are really good at it, and there are people who are not. There are professionals, quote unquote professionals, who I think are not really that great at reading screenplays and discerning what it should be and what it shouldn't be, based on my interactions with some of these said professionals. But then there's some people who get it, and so that know what a screenplay is and what a screenplay isn't. And the great thing is there's so many great books. I mean, I've got a shelf full of them over here to my right. There's so many great books about screenplays and how to write a great screenplay, whether it be a romantic comedy, whether it be a drama, or however specific you want. I mean, there's a author who's the first person I read about screenplays, Sid Field, who's written tons of books on screenplay writing, and it makes for interesting reading, but you really have to retrain your brain in not just writing it, but also in reading it, like the question you asked, in order for it to make sense. Because reading it as, if you read a screenplay and you've never read one and you're used to reading novels, I think the end result is going to be confusion. Like where is everything? Like why is so much missing? And once you get past that and you see how the medium works, I think it's a lot easier.
I feel like it's the same way with comic books when you read a comic book script. Because I feel like a comic book script and a screenplay, I mean, I've only read the screenplays that you've written. In all honesty, actually, I read my friend Jim Spivey was on one of my previous interviews, and he's written like an award-winning screenplay that I've had the luck to read. But it was hard to flip the switch in my brain. But when I started correlating it to comic books, it actually helped me because comic books are similar. They're actually more descriptive than a screenplay is, but it's more about, you hear people say it gives vibes. You just want to give vibes,
Yeah.
like, so you're not going to say like illustrate a little flower over here, I want it to be a red tulip, you know what I mean? So it kind of like prepped me for screenplay reading.
Yeah, and that's a good correlation. I think the actual screenplay is like the finished comic book form, if you think about it, because in the comic book form, the finished comic book, the descriptions, in between the sequences are very short. Regardless of what they describe, they're very short, and the dialogue really moves along the story. The dialogue and the images. So sometimes you'll have an image, and then right next to it you have another image with dialogue, and then underneath it'll have an image with no dialogue, with a short description moving to the next one, and that really moves the story. And it's the same. I mean, I think it's a great way to look at it. I'd never really thought of it, but films are like comic books. They're like completed comic books at the end of the day, from how they're put on the paper and written to how they're finished.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, when you go from sometimes when you go from script to scene, you do storyboarding in between. And
Yeah,
storyboarding is comic books.
yeah,
It's just
definitely,
the arrange
definitely.
the panels are all the same, but it's basically kind of like comic books.
100%. I storyboard everything that I do. Some of it a lot better if someone else is doing the storyboards than me. But when I storyboard, I do like stick figures, but and where the camera's positioned, where they're looking, and so it's very basic. But I've done projects where the storyboards are very like well done, and it looks like a comic book. The art is amazing. Everything but color. And moves the story forward. So, uh,
And it's much less expensive to do some storyboarding and figuring out that it's not working than it is to actually have the whole cast and crew on set and be like, yeah.
definitely. And the storyboards are really like, what angle do you want the camera? How tight do you want the shot? Like, yeah, do you want a medium? Do you want a close up? Do you want a medium close up? Do you want a wide? And what the feel is that you're trying to evince from the audience. And that's really the point of the storyboard. It's like, okay, are we zooming in? Are we panning? Is the camera moving or not? Is it a static shot? Are we going handheld? Those types of things in a storyboard, they're evident. So
I have a recommendation to anyone who ever decides to put me on film, and that is, I do not set me up for my close up, Mr. DeVille. Nope, nope. Snapchat filter me. Just
hey, I'm the same as you. It's funny. I've never been in anything I've done. I think maybe early things I might have been a body that walked across that you couldn't make out my face, but it was necessary. Maybe I was short of people,
extra
so
like,
I'll be an extra. But yeah, I've never been featured. Never wanted to act. Never wanted to be on screen, and happy to keep it that way.
Well, you
I,
look beautiful today.
Hey, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I've actually, I've taken acting classes, which I recommend for anyone who's doing any type of filmmaking or screenplay writing to actually take the class because it definitely changes your perspective of how you, from a writer standpoint, how you deliver the material. But yeah, taking the classes, but never wanted to do the work.
That's interesting. Um, you know, because I mean, when you're acting, you understand that there's certain direction you need and certain direction that you don't need. And so that must be an interesting intellectual exercise as to, what can be whittled. We talk about like being concise, like exit stage left. That might be all you need. Do you stomp? Do you yell and put your hands in your? I don't know. What do you? You're the actor. Figure that out. All I know is I need you off the goddamn stage. Get off.
Yeah, and a lot of that's actor's choice. Part of it is if you're not specific, then you're giving the actor the ability to um, craft it how they want, unless the director comes in and says this is how you have to do it. But as a writer, if you don't put it on the page, it's not going to be done. If you've envisioned it a certain way, then you have to be specific in how you've envisioned it. If you've you know if and for me as a writer slash director, um, I always say when I'm working with actors that number one, the script is just a blueprint, right? So I don't need you to deliver every single word exactly as it's written, unless something that you say is going to be utilized later on as a trope or something. So I need it said exactly as it's written, in which case I'll let you know. And part of that is because you write dialogue and you create these characters and in your mind you're thinking, okay, this is perfect, but the actor you have may not be comfortable with saying a word a certain way, or may not be comfortable with the way the alliteration has appears on the page, and so they have to do it in a way that makes it comfortable for me. I mean, I know, like, even as we're speaking today, I have growing up I had a speech impediment. Like, I had speech therapy up until like fourth grade, and so like I find myself when I'm speaking, like I always go back in my mind. I'm thinking like, okay, I have to slow down. And then if I'm saying certain words, then I can't say them, so I switch them. So there's like, and even today, it's tough, thinking about it as I'm moving fast. And if I'm speaking fast and I'm going fast, then the words that I say, I might have to backtrack in my mind and say something different. And so even with actors, it's the same thing. Like some actors are comfortable with dialogue a certain way, and so they've got to they've got to change it. And then actors also, they embody these characters, and you're like, you know, exit stage left. I mean, you wouldn't say that because it's not a play, and so you don't have the stage. But it's like, walk out of the room. And again, I would say it because unless it's very necessary, I don't show people walking in and out. But like if simple direction, walk out of the room. It's like it's a million different ways to walk out of the room. So what is the scene? Like, did something happen and they're happy and they just got something like that they didn't expect to get? So it's like, yes, it's a fist pump, or they're clicking their heels as they jump up in the air. Like, you know, what are you trying to evoke by them walking out of the room? And so that's something for me. It's like I'm not going to leave it to chance if it's something that's important. I'm going to put it down on page.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because I wonder how many like actions that actors have done in film that were written actions as opposed to choices that they and their directors have made. Like, if I have no idea. Like when Adam Driver punched a hole in the wall in Marriage Story, was that written in? Was that
Definitely.
extemporaneous? I
Now,
honestly have no idea is the answer. I might be an Adam Driver fan. I'm not that deep into it. Like, I'm not that deep. Um,
definitely written it
oh, okay. All right. Good. All right.
because
Now,
because
now we have the answer to that question.
the wall is going to be fake, and as a seasoned actor, Adam Driver's not going to risk like punching a wall and then having to wait to get it repaired or replaced in order to do the scene, because you got to realize you're doing that same scene a dozen times. So in a big blockbuster, you're doing that over and over and over again, and so it's going to hurt to punch that wall, over and over again and get that effect.
I didn't
But
even
some
think
of the
about the
best,
pain. I was thinking about the little guy with the spackle, like, give it
yes,
30 minutes, we can do this again.
it's amazing. Some of the the best scenes are those that are improvised by the actors, at the last second, with or without the director's knowledge. And it may not be written on the page, but some of the best things are like, oh, look what they did. They changed it. It's interesting. It made it different. One of the ones that's come up a lot, at least during the Me Too movement, was I think Bill Murray um, kissing Scarlett Johansson um, at the end of the movie that they did in Japan. And it was in Tokyo. I can't think of the name right now. It escapes me. But he kissed her at the end, and it wasn't written. And so, from an acting directing standpoint, like that's a no-no. You don't encroach upon someone's space, and from a physical standpoint, you don't kiss someone without the understanding that that's part of the scene, or it's going to be there. But you know from him back when he did it, and I think that was many years before Me Too. It was like he said he felt the scene was missing something, and he wanted it to shock her as much as him doing it would in real life. And it worked amazingly for the scene, but obviously now that would never fly, and rightfully so. But that's one example that's come to light recently. But there's tons of other examples of people just doing something spontaneously and it working.
Has there ever been a time when a actor that you've hired has added some flavor you didn't expect?
Oh yeah, definitely. And as a director, I sort of I encourage it. Like make the scene your own. Don't be afraid to do something. And usually, the first two takes, three takes are my takes. They're how the scene is written, and how I envision them and how it's on paper. And then after that, let's do a couple takes and make it whatever it is you want it to be. Make it, if you've envisioned something else in your mind, let's see what it is. Hold on one second. This is apple juice.
I'll cut this part out. Don't worry.
Little apple juice. Little apple juice.
Be like, this is not apple juice. This is bourbon.
Hey, I'm a writer. We drink bourbon. We drink scotch. What do you do?
The other day, I think it was like 4th of July, my family was playing video games. Right. And they've been obsessed with Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I've got 8-year-old Spawn and 43-year-old hubsters, and they're just going for it. They have a 40 minutes on the clock, and then they switch everybody's games. But there's no place for me in that. So I had my 4th of July adult beverage, and I just sat here and I was like, well, I guess I'm writing. And I was drinking and writing, and I'm like, this is great. Why was it taking me so long to become an alcoholic? I don't even. Never mind. I'm leaving this all in. I'm not cutting this out.
Hey, it's crazy. I don't actually drink, and that brings up so for me, it's so hard to write scenes where I have drunk characters, and I write what I think I see, but I think it's the hardest thing to do is to write drunk characters and even to direct people as drunk, because it always seems in films it's almost always so over the top. Whereas in real life, there's a subtlety to people to being drunk, and there's different kinds of drunk. There's a happy drunk, and there's the mean drunk, and so it's hard to, for whatever reason, it's a lot of times reading other people's scripts and then watching it on film. That's one of the hardest things I think to do, is to convey a drunken scene.
Drunken scenes, because I'm oblivious. Somebody can be drunk in front of me, and unless they're a kind of drunk, I'm like, they're fine. They're just a really nice person. They're just enjoying themselves. And little do I know, they're not even going to remember this tomorrow.
Right. And that's part of the difficulty, right? So just thinking of screenplay, you're not very descriptive as far as, what the drunken activities are, unless they're stumbling drunk and they're falling over themselves. It's it's like Nicole is drunk having a conversation with Bob. And then Cole says something, and then so the actor has to what does it mean when I'm drunk? And the director will help.
Bob,
how drunk are you?
Let me tell you about this, Bob.
Exactly. Exactly. So what does drunk mean in that situation? And that's the part of the medium. a lot of creativity, and it's a lot of like, no, that's a little bit too much, and a lot of give and take, and I'm sure that the actor and director work ahead of time, and it's like, no, this is what I'm looking for, this is what it is.
So you bring up a good part about, you could probably drive some of that with the dialogue. Because if you say that they're drunk and they're like, Bob, Bob, Bobby Bob, Bobby Bob, 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 then you're kind of driving towards a certain kind of drunk. But thinking about dialogue in other ways, is dialogue a place in screenwriting where you get to fill up more of the page? Because I know that all of the action, all of the description, super tight. It's the opposite of prose. You want white on the page, as opposed to with prose where you don't want white on the page. But like, does dialogue have more fluidity when it comes to being more long? I'm eloquent. I'm friggin' eloquent.
So you definitely, from a screenplay standpoint, you want the white on the page, right? So, and if your page is filled with words and it's, you got all the letters on there and it's completely inundated with words, then you've done a bad job because it's too much description. And now there obviously are exceptions. Like if you're doing an action film and there's a fight sequence and it's very detailed for how it needs to happen, then that page may be all description of how the fight transpires. But for the most part, the film moves along with action and dialogue. And so the dialogue in a screenplay is very condensed. So the dialogue is in like less than the middle third of the page, right? So the dialogue, if you've got a page that's yay wide, then the dialogue is here going down the middle of the page. So they got the character's name and the dialogue, and it's in a little bit less than the middle third of the page. And so if you've got descriptions, action sequences are what they are, the action goes across the full page, but the dialogue is in the middle third. And so you want more middle third filled than anything else. And, generally speaking, you don't want more than two, maximum three, but preferably two lines of action for any sequence. So, you put the two lines of action, then where's the dialogue? That's the expectation. Where's the dialogue? Let's have some dialogue. You get even if it's just one character saying something, then you have another description of what's happening, like one, maybe two lines of action description, and then where is the dialogue? And so, yes.
Thinking of it in the terms of playwriting again, there's times where actors might have a long monologue or soliloquy and things like that. I feel like I don't often see that in movies, and when I see that, it's very sparse. Is that an intentional thing, or is it dependent on the genre that I'm reading or watching?
I don't think it depends on the genre. It's just, it's hard for one person to capture, visual moving media, a film, and it's hard to keep your focus on one person for a page and a half of essentially diatribe. And it's really hard. One person who's amazing at it, and I love his work of writing these long, like for lack of a better word, diatribes. These long speeches that one character is given is Aaron Sorkin. From The West Wing, American President, The Newsroom. He's done some amazing stuff, and in all of them, you have characters who are giving these long speeches, and then, it's like, whether it's President Andrew Shepard and the American president, or you've got the president in The West Wing, Bartlett. You've got Jeff Bridges and The Newsroom. They have these scenes where they give these long speeches, and it works. And part of it is it works because of how it's conveyed on screen, and sometimes with The Newsroom, there's always someone interrupting. There's always someone like with a word that, like, and it could just be a word, really, and he keeps going. But that really sets it off, and gets him to move to the next line in his long speech without it being continuous. But sometimes, it's just, uh, yeah, the American president is just, the president is just speaking. Andrew Shepard is just, he's having this conversation about his girlfriend, Sydney Ellen Wade, and the guy who's running against him for president. And he just goes into this 2.5 minute speech about like why the other guy is not qualified to be president, and Andrew Shepard, the president, is. And it's great, but it's very rare.
Good to know. It's good to
It's
know
hard
because
to
I
do
feel
well.
like I don't see it very like. There's other really cool things. Wasn't was it Birdman? There was one movie that was shot, and it was all one shot, or like or if not, they did like a very clever thing where someone walked across the screen, so it was like a cut, but you couldn't tell it was a cut.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah,
was
there's
it
tons
Birdman?
of yeah, I think Birdman was done that way. I mean, there's tons of movies. I watched a movie during the pandemic. Uh can't think of the title of it, but I think it had Amari Hardwick and um um I think Megan Good. I'm not sure, but I just remember the whole movie was supposed to be one take, and in visually it was close. I mean, it like I watched it and I had to, like, it took me a minute to find where I think they had two cuts, but it was an hour and a half movie, and I saw only two cuts. And it's very rare. You're gonna have a movie that takes place in 1.5 hours, and or but scenes that are just focused on one character for like 3 or 4 minutes happen all the time. You know, the camera person usually hates it if it's handheld because they're sitting there holding the camera and the camera's heavy and they're holding it for 3 or 4 minutes, and that's part of like the choreography of filmmaking, right? So the choreography of filmmaking is that the director in this case is the choreographer, and but they've taken words written by someone else, and they've gotten actors to play these words, and now they've got to merge it all together with the cameraman who's moving, and everyone has to hit their marks, right? So you're doing a scene with just no cuts, a one take scene, and you've got multiple people, and the camera is moving. Everyone has to hit their mark in order for it to work, and it's not unlike stage plays, but the great thing about stage plays for the most part is that there's no cameraman, truthfully, in the midst of the action, capturing everything and having to go back and forth. If you're doing like a single camera shot where you've got to capture a bunch of different things, then everyone has to hit their mark like in a stage play, but everyone has to not only hit their mark, the camera person has to catch everyone hitting their mark. And, that makes it interesting.
Do you think that that's a decision that the director made or that the screenplay writer intended?
Usually it's the director made. The one thing we say, and I break the rule when I'm doing things for myself, is that writers don't write directions on the screenplay. There's no like exit stage left. It doesn't exist. Camera shooting from above. It doesn't exist. Now, as a screenplay writer, what you do is you try to get creative, right? So you can't write camera directions because then they say, "Oh, you're an amateur." Like only amateurs are writing camera directions in a screenplay because that's the decision that is that's made by the director, right? So what you do is you get creative. And so if you want an overhead shot, then you've got to visually paint the picture of why you want an overhead shot. So, something is in the person's hair and it's only viewable from the top. Or a bird, comes and poops on someone's head, then then you can, visually you can paint the picture of why you need that shot. But otherwise, there are no directions. There are no like camera directions as far as where the camera is going to be placed.
Like subliminal messaging, director, this is what I'm pushing your way.
Yeah, it's like, it's one of those things. person A walks in behind person B and slaps them on the camera and slaps them on the arm, on the shoulder, and then walks around, what you're saying, and then walks around them and the person sees who it was. Like what you're saying is from a visual standpoint and from a camera standpoint is the camera follows as person A walks into the room and slaps person B on the shoulder and then walks around. The camera follows them as they walk around and then turns around so that the camera is now facing person B so that we see person B recognize person A. That's what you're saying, but you've got to do it in a way that it doesn't look like you're given the directions. Because truthfully, a screenplay is nothing more than a blueprint, right? It's a blueprint to how the scene should be shot. So the directions should be there without you telling the director that the directions are there. And that, you make the director's job easy because it's easy to see what's necessary. And every director is going to do their own spin. They're going to, some directors like to walk and talk. So even if a scene isn't moving, they're going to move. They're going to move the characters because there's nothing more boring than a static shot of over the shoulder, me looking at you, you looking at me, and then the cut is this. This is all we see. So most directors are like, okay, the camera's moving, they're doing things. Someone, grabs a glass and then they go sit down and then the camera goes low with them and the other person is standing up. So you've got a different angle. You've got to do something because it's a visual medium. So you need to show, some sort of movement. Otherwise, people get bored. No one wants to watch us having a conversation. Other than everyone on YouTube. Other than everyone on YouTube are watching that.
Why I make movements, like.
It works for this type of thing, but it doesn't work for a film.
Yeah, I can understand that. So, we're coming up on time. So, is there any advice you want to give to baby screenwriters?
Baby screenwriters is write and don't be afraid to let others who have more experience than you read your writing. And because that's the only way you're going to get better. You can read as many screenwriting books as you want, you can read as many screenplays as you want, but the end result is that you're not going to get better until you actively practice the craft, until you actively do and write what's on the page. And then you'll learn the mistakes that you're making and why they're mistakes. And part of that is writing and rewriting, but also having seasoned veteran eyes read what you've written and point out like the industry standards for things, which there are industry standards. There's the unwritten rule of screenplay writing that there are no rules, but it's not really true. There are no rules if you've got a big name. There are no rules if you're going to shoot it yourself. But if you're providing it and you want to get it sold and you want a studio to make it, there's somewhat rules because people are used to things. If you format it the way you want to format it, no one's going to read it. If you write it as a novel and all the dialogue is in novel form, no one's reading a screenplay like that because that's not how they're used to, and they can't discern, from that how many pages it is and how long it'll take to shoot. No one's going to take the time. So you've got to follow the standard formats, and to keep writing. Write, rewrite, write, rewrite. Keep polishing.
I love it. Thank you for being with us today, Torry.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
Everyone give Torry your love. Do some likes and subscribes. Of course, you have to ask for subscribes. And I will make sure that Torry sees every comment that comes here. So leave some comments.
Sounds great.
Thank you. So we're going to say goodbye to Torry, but Torry's going to stay on with me. Bye, Torry.
Bye, Nicole. Thank you.